Presentation of Encompass is made possible in part by a grant from the Milkey Family Foundation, supporting the arts, education, health and elderly care in the Appleton and Shawano areas.
Prairie chickens are a good example of what is happening to one species after another, not only in the United States, but all over the world. And Wisconsin had prairie chickens in every county in the state at one time, including Milwaukee County. They were hunted by market hunters. They were killed in the thousands, hundreds of thousands, shipped by barrel to markets in Boston and New York and Chicago. There were loads of prairie chickens. And then they began to go. And so, for some time, because there were so many, they could go. And still there'd be a lot left. But as the environment goes, the species goes.
After all, one's always upset with the thought that one would lose a great painting like the Mona Lisa, or magnificent architecture. And we need to have a public that appreciates the wild things and their beauty. And they are fully as valuable, if not more valuable, than the most glorious works of man.
For over 50 years, Doctors Frederick and Francis Hammerstrom have dedicated themselves to the study, care, and preservation of wildlife. Most of that time has been spent here, on the Buena Vista Marsh in central Wisconsin. Their lifelong work with Wisconsin prairie chickens and raptors, or birds of prey, enables us to see the relationship of these birds to our environment more clearly, through their eyes on the marsh.
It's not that we are purely interested in birds, all birds, just birds. We're research types. We're curious. We want to find out how things work.
Well, I think at the outset I should say we're very different types of people, in spite of the fact that we've worked together so long. I'm much more personal about animals, and I like to have my hands on them. I like to touch them. I think it makes for a good team. It makes for plenty of variety, and occasionally it makes for quite a lot of excitement, doesn't it?
It was Frederick and Fran's mutual love for the outdoors that led them from Boston to the Midwest in the early 1930s. Here, with a handful of others, they became pioneers in the field of wildlife management.
This was 50-odd years ago, remember, and there was no wildlife field at all. There was ornithology, pure bird study. Cornell had a very fine program. California had a very fine program. There were mammalogists who studied mammals. There were ichthyologists who studied fish. But the field of wildlife, as we know it now, relating to, we started in with game, the kind of wildlife that is hunted. But the wildlife field as it is now so well-known and popular didn't exist. So we couldn't say we're going to become wildlifers and go look for a job.
Yes, kids think it's tough nowadays to find a job. In this particular field, wildlife or conservation. But in those days there was no field. It was also tough, if I may say so. Well, for one thing, we were so ignorant. We were both city kids. We both knew beautifully how to behave at big parties, how to wear evening clothes, how to dance under crystal chandeliers and all that sort of thing. We did not know how to live in the backwoods and survive, and we had to learn it the hard way. And it was extremely exciting to just survive. So we had to adapt from a city background, and we had, I would say, about the most tremendous store of ignorance that any two people could have managed. What do you think of that
Pretty
statement?
hard to match.
Yes. We were so ignorant.
And all of this added to the excitement and
It was a glorious
fascination
adventure.
of it. Nothing was routine. Everything was new. Everything had to be tried.
They thought we were a bit loony. This business of running around and trying to catch birds, and what good does it do? And they didn't seem to realize they're catching the birds in order to band them, in order to learn more. And of course, you need that type of knowledge if you're going to be saving species. This was very hard to explain to people.
Our first field assignment was in 1932 in Iowa, where we were working on pheasants. And Iowa farmers tend to be pretty practical types, and they kept asking us, well, what are you doing, and why are you doing this? And we finally found an answer that satisfied them. I said, I'm paid to. All right.
But of course, it wasn't the real answer.
No, but
We were trying to do something that was going to be helpful and add to knowledge that would keep the earth in better balance. We had much higher aims than just making money, obviously.
Among other new ideas pioneered by the Hammerstroms was that of women working in the field, and Fran's participation met with a lot of resistance.
Iowa State had a very strict nepotism rule, in addition to the fact that they didn't want any women anyway. They would not permit two members of one family to be on the payroll, so Fran was simply excluded. But she was permitted by special arrangement, by special dispensation, and it was very special. She was allowed to help me in the field, which was
I was so lucky to be able to go along. I could ride in the same car with him, and I could work full-time for nothing. And I knew, when you're lucky, you're lucky. I finally got hired. I was paid $25 for a whole summer's work. But I was allowed to work with my man in the field that we both loved. I never resented it. We had a girl working here, a biologist, a while back, and she said, Fran, you seem to be so happy when all these awful things happen, like being paid $25 for a summer or working for nothing and all that. And she said, I guess you just didn't know any better.
Frederick and Fran left Iowa to become students of Aldo Leopold at the University of Wisconsin. Leopold, known as the father of ecology and the author of the Sand County Almanac, had a major influence on their life.
he was the master. We were unusually lucky in working with two of the very best, Leopold and Arrington. Unlike many professors, he had his students out, off campus, in field areas. Our area was just south of here on the Leola Marsh. He knew what we were doing and directed it, told us things that we need to consider and how to get at it, but not on a professor-student, you take the notes and hand me back the answers basis. He was a splendid man.
It was Leopold who offered Fran and Frederick the opportunity to study the prairie chicken. When the Hammerstroms began their assignment, the number of prairie chickens in Wisconsin had dropped to an alarming level.
Our job, when we came here, was find out enough about prairie chickens so that we can give them some of the things they need or keep from losing some of the things they need so we don't lose the prairie chickens. And this is not a direct, simple approach like going down to the supermarket and counting loaves of bread. We had to learn things that nobody knew about prairie chickens and then try to fit them together into some kind of a pattern that would make sense.
The Hammerstroms began their research on the prime mating grounds near the marsh. Named for the distinctive sound made by the male, these booming grounds began to yield some important information.
Well, the booming ground is essentially a bachelor's club. And they'll come together at the place they already know, they've known for years, and put on a little show. What happens as a result of all this is that they establish individual territories. Each cock has his own piece of that larger area in which they are all gathered. But once those territories are established, from there on, they don't have to go into real fights. It becomes a ritual. And the cock can simply show himself on his boundary to his neighbor, and that means each one has said to the other, I'm here, and I'm just as tough as I was yesterday, and don't make any mistakes. And then they run along the edge of the boundary and break away and go off somewhere else. Here's this tremendous show the cocks are putting on with color, action, sound, and the hens are just sort of walking around. It looks as though they were completely oblivious to the whole thing. Plainly they aren't, but...
Actually, he was the first person to find out that there were territories. Nowadays, ornithologists discuss these territories as though they were a matter of course. It took us 2 years to find out that there were territories. There was a major breakthrough. Nobody knew it then. They thought that they just went out there and fought. Higgledy-piggledy. Each one's fighting for his own little piece of ground.
These and other discoveries made by the Hammerstroms have led to a deeper understanding of the prairie chicken and the need for proper land management.
I think it's fair to say that with the help of a great many other people, prairie chickens in Wisconsin are secure. We certainly have a tiny fraction of what was once here, but things have been set up now in such a way that we're not apt to lose what we have remaining. They will go up and down in numbers, but we've got enough land bought for them and managed for them so that barring some essentially catastrophe, they should pull through. The difficulty, the one thing above all others that I am afraid of and that I cannot guarantee is what is going to happen with these changes in agro-business, modern agriculture. The use of poisons. Farming, we know how to manage. The ordinary type of farming, the kind of farming that was here when we got here. No problem. You simply know that if you plow up half a section of grass, you're going to have fewer prairie chickens. But you also know that if you save enough acres of that grass, you'll keep your prairie chickens. But when somebody starts spraying poison from the air, and it doesn't go just where he wants it to go, but it drifts and it comes on the prairie chicken land as well.
The old family farm had a good deal to recommend it. It was ecologically sounder than these great monotypes, because if you have all one kind of crop, it's just a pushover for disease. Just like a great city full of poor people is a pushover for disease. We seem to think there's wealth in bringing people into the state, and actually I think it's impoverishing our landscape. Oregon has already recognized this. It's the first state to recognize it. We haven't come to that yet.
I said earlier the prairie chicken is one of the more sensitive ones, so that it is more easily lost than something else. But if you say, so let's lose the prairie chicken, then what next? And where do you finally say, no, we don't want to lose any more? By the time you reach that point, maybe you're down to microtus and grasshoppers.
The prairie chicken study relies heavily on the use of volunteer observers known as boomers. And over the course of the study, thousands of boomers set up camp in the Hammerstroms' 100-year-old farmhouse adjacent to the marsh. Besides giving Fran and Frederick more eyes on the marsh, it also presents an opportunity to pass on to others some of the knowledge and techniques they have acquired over the years.
I think if we have any immortality, it will be in this passing down to other people what we've learned and our viewpoints, and they will in turn pass it on, and it spreads. And it was passed on to us by Aldo Leopold and Paul Errington, and the books we read and the other things that came before us. And we're all part of something that is making the world better, or trying to make it better.
We build on what went before. If everyone, whether in this wildlife field or in the other field, if every individual started out from scratch, things would go pretty slowly, and in fact they probably never would get very far. But the fact that you have done something that will be of use to the next one means he goes another big step farther. Someone said any professor worth his salt will have his students surpass him. Well, of course, that's what he's there for, to give them the start so they can build on what's there. They need to have direct contact. I don't think you can pass this word along in a vacuum. I don't think you can pass it along just through textbooks. They've got to experience it somehow. They've got to know what it is, and not just in theory, but best of all, right there in the hand.
The Hammerstroms have been able to give this type of hands-on experience by taking on apprentices for periods of concentrated study.
Well, we call them gaboons. And Sports Illustrated telephoned me a while back and asked me how to spell that word. They were doing an article on a gaboon. And I said, we spell it with 2 B's. It seems more insulting.
I've been informed that the meaning of gaboon translates into something like it's the lowest form of life. And when you think that I started out as a junior sub-gaboon and I'm now up to a full-fledged senior gaboon, that's pretty good.
Actually, we love the gaboons, and if anyone says anything against our gaboons, we're furious. They are apprentices. And it's one of the things that cannot be given in these schools. You notice we never have more than 4. You notice how few there are. It's very hard to get to be a gaboon.
The training here is just, it's amazing. First of all, it's so much knowledge packed in to such a short amount of time. And it's hands-on experience. It's not like you can read a book and say, all right, this is how you band a bird. I've been told how to band a bird. I've been told how to carry owls and that. But when I came here, I'd never done it. And now that I've done it, it's fantastic experience. I've picked up stuff that I'll never forget.
Field experience is tough to get as it is. Through the Hammerstroms, it's something that is presented in a different way. They, more from the old world, they have a different way of looking at things.
You know, the Hammerstroms have probably had 7,000 to 8,000 people in that house, if you include their work in the prairie chickens. And I think everybody that's been here has come away with something more than they came here with.
I think they're pretty fantastic people. They, a lot of the stuff they've done, I've always dreamed of doing, and every time I come down here, I learn something new. There's never a dull moment, you know, there's always something going on.
With the help of the gaboons, Frederick and Fran have been able to maintain a study of the marsh hawk, or harrier, for over 27 years. By trapping and banding the harriers, they have been able to make some significant findings on the predator-prey relationship.
We locate the nest, and then sometime in July, we'll walk into that nest with our trapping equipment, which includes the great horned owl and the net that we set up over the owl. And we set the owl on a perch real close to the nest, 20 to 30 feet from the nest, set him up on the perch, and set this net over the top of the owl. We use great horned owls as bait animals because a great horned owl will almost eat anything, any young, any adult. And if you set a great horned owl out in the middle of the woods, you're probably going to get everything from sparrows to raptors coming in and giving distress calls and stooping on it. Everything fears horned owls because, you know, they'll eat anything. As the harriers come back to the nest, they will dive at the owl or circle and give a distress call. And as they dive at the owl, they get caught up in the net. The net breaks away from the poles, and the harriers get wrapped up in the net. And there's usually somebody waiting fairly close in the grass, and they can run out and catch the harrier right away before we can get out. And then after we catch the harrier, we go through the process of banding them. We band the adults, and we also color mark them. It's our own color combinations. We don't, everybody has their own colors. We have certain combinations that we use, and it's a permanent marker. And then after we get the leg markers on, we go through and imp the birds, which involves cutting out 2 of the bird's feathers and replacing them with 2 of our feathers, which are dyed. And they're also dyed different color combinations, yellow, red. And then that enables us to see the bird sometime in the future and be able to tell with exactly at that time where the bird was banded, how old it is, what kind of a bird it is, the sex.
Right now, I'm getting reference material for Jonathan Weldy, who is illustrating a book I'm writing for the Smithsonian Institution Press called Harrier Hawk of the Marshes. The hawk that is ruled by a mouse, and it is. Mice determine how many harriers will be in an area. They determine at what age the young males will breed. They determine how many wives the old males will take on, if I may use the term wife. The technical term is polygyny. Mice control this, which I think is a darned interesting thing. It may be my most important scientific finding. It is ever so much harder to do wildlife work than it used to be. There are all sorts of laws restricting one from doing one's job properly, which can get to be pretty ridiculous. You have to have so many permits. And where it does the most harm, I think, is it keeps people from living intimately with animals. In order to have a wild pet, in some states you have to have a tremendous number of permits. Now, Wisconsin's law is pretty good, and there are a fair number of wild pets that are allowed. But children used to have pet crows, that's illegal, pet owls. Owls just love to be with people. They're crazy about being with people. There's nothing so awful about people that people live with dogs, why shouldn't they live with owls? So many people think you're restraining an animal and holding it against its will. And they make such a sharp distinction between wild animals and domestic animals. After all, we've ridden horses and had them working for years and years and years. But people are amazed if you have a working owl.
Frederick and Fran have written, contributed, and collaborated on scores of books on birds and wildlife. And Fran has brought her unique lighthearted touch to a series of books on their true life adventures.
Well, Strictly for the Chickens is a story of our adventures trying to save the prairie chickens and the attitudes of the public, which were sometimes quite hostile. It tells everything true, but I'm afraid I have a frivolous nature. I try not to have it show too much. It's a lot of fun to read. It's a funny book. And Birding with a Purpose, my latest book, is even funnier. It's rather rowdy. Our Little Brushes with the Police, for example. But it tells a great deal of solid material about the history of raptor trapping, how you catch these birds, why you band them, how you go to get hawk owls, some of our expeditions, working in the real cold, working in the real heat.
Fran's most popular book, however, may be Walk When the Moon is Full, written about moonlight walks with her 2 children, Alan and Elva.
It starts when Alan is small, and he says, do we have to go to bed early every night until we are old? I figure that's a darned interesting question for a child to ask. I think it over a bit, and I say, no, you don't. You put on your outdoor clothes right now, over your pajamas, and out we'll go. We'll go walking in the moonlight. And then I promised, every night when the moon is full, I promise I'll take you walking. And I kept that promise. And this book is of those moonlight walks with the children.
Although Frederick and Fran have accomplished much in their 50 years of wildlife work, they still see a need to keep their eyes on the marsh.
In some ways, we've accomplished more than we expected in our wildest dreams, I would say.
Well, that's true.
I more or
because-
less thought life ended at 40, and that what we got done before we were 40 was what mattered, and everything beyond that would be velvet, and obviously we've done most of our good things after we were 40. We've managed to keep quite a lot more going. And of course, we wouldn't still be working at these things if we were satisfied. We're not. We want to do ever so much more, and we want to give ever so much more.
We'd like to know more about prairie chickens, for example, as one case. It looks as though they are pretty secure from what's been done so far, but we certainly don't know all there is to be known about them by a long shot. And just the sheer intrigue of knowing answers that are still questions.
And I want to work on green herons next. As soon as the harrier work is done, I've worked on that for 25 years, now I want to work on green herons. Our water is more contaminated than the earth. And I think somebody with my peculiar bent of mind, a falconer who is also an ethologist and who likes to train animals and live with them so that she can watch them behave naturally, should be working on some of the water birds, and I think green herons would be the best.
We want to know more about the ospreys that we're watching in Mexico, and the Harris hawks that we're working on in Texas. Still lots of questions there.
And I want to write several more books. I have a feeling that with each one of my books I can give a viewpoint. People tend to laugh when they're reading my books and enjoy themselves, but they're learning. It's not that I'm trying to con them into learning. It's just one of the things I want to do. Now you get to the Hammerstrom rule of thirds that I mentioned in Strictly for the Chickens. And that is, you spend a third of your time doing what the Conservation Department or whoever pays you asks you to do. And you spend a third of your time doing what they want you to do and what you want to do. And you spend the other third of time doing exactly as you please. And I found that part of doing exactly as I pleased, and so did Frederick, was what really paid off. Didn't you find that too? Exactly. That's where we were free and creative. And of course, the only way that system works is you're not working a 40-hour week. You are working 7 days a week, and you may not take a day off for 3 or 4 months. You're really working. That gives you all that extra third for your own free time. But that's the difference between a job and a profession. And I think if you have the viewpoint that of adventure and public service, you can hardly beat that. And if you have the feeling you want to leave the world a better place than you found it, it gives a certain zest to all the things you do. And somehow that gives you new frontiers, which are stimulating, even though they aren't the Boy Scout type of roughing it in the wild type. I'm glad we had both.
Presentation of Encompass is made possible in part by a grant from the Milky Family Foundation, supporting the arts, education, health and elderly care in the Appleton and Shawano areas.